Hello, my dears. My name is Mariana and welcome to my channel. So today I want to talk about something that has been so important to me on my journey into the divine feminine and something I just really want to share with you. So my journey into the divine feminine has looked a little bit different than most people's. I think most people kind of come at it through their lived experience or through, engaging with their femininity. But I found the divine feminine through my academic study. When I was at graduate school, I read some stuff and I was like, this changes everything. And so it wasn't through these typical goddesses like Aphrodite and Isis that I kind of came to the divine feminine. It was through the more mysterious, the more intangible versions of the divine feminine, the emanations of her that have come into being and then disappeared. And that just fascinated me. And so it was through Sophia that I really came to embrace the divine feminine as I do today. Full disclosure, Sophia is most absolutely my favorite goddess, and that's why I put together my next seminar, which I just want to briefly tell you about before we jump into it, because I think you're going to want to come if this interests you at all. And that is Seeking Sophia, tracing divine feminine wisdom through Gnosticism, mysticism, and psychology. We are going to do a deep dive into the goddess Sophia and her underground influence across 2 millennia through her secret gospel, alchemy, art, depth psychology, the tarot, and more. We're going to talk about her Gnostic legacy. We're going to talk about the Sophia Jesus syzygy, that's a word we're going to talk about later, and her hidden influence on Christian mysticism. We're going to talk about the alchemical Sophia and her role as anima mundi, and we're going to talk about how Sophia is the portal to a new and very necessary feminine consciousness, and it's just going to be so exciting, and it's not something that's done very often. You don't actually get opportunities to learn about Sophia very often because she's such a complex figure. A lot of people are afraid to talk about her, but I'm not, because I'm a dumb Scorpio. So I really hope you join me. All the information is down in the description and I will see you there. Okay, let's get into it. You might have heard of Sophia before, but maybe been a little confused because she's not a typical goddess like we think of Aphrodite or Isis. She's actually an emanation of the divine feminine that has existed through several different time periods in history. She doesn't really come from one specific culture as much as she reaches across millennia. Sophia today is actually a feminine name, and it comes from the Greek, which means wisdom. And absolutely, Sophia is about wisdom. And in fact, we first find her in the Book of Wisdom, in her Proverbs, describing her own power. And it's really important that in the Book of Wisdom, Sophia actually speaks of herself in the first person. She's not something that is described or just, an energy that kind of floats around. She identifies herself as being an agent of real power and divine authority. The Lord brought me forth as the first of his works, before his deeds of old. I was formed long ages ago, at the very beginning, when the world came to be. When there were no watery depths, I was given birth. When there were no springs overflowing with water, before the mountains were settled in place, before the hills, I was given birth. Before he made the world or its fields, or any of the dust of the earth. I was there when he set the heavens in place, when he marked out the horizon on the face of the deep, when he established the clouds above and fixed securely the fountains of the deep, when he gave the sea its boundary, so the waters would not overstep his command, and when he marked out the foundations of the earth. Then I was constantly at his side. I was filled with delight day after day, rejoicing always in his presence, rejoicing in his whole world and delighting in mankind. But the goddess Sophia comes from the Judeo-Christian tradition, and that's where we're going to really explore her today. She was a major figure of Gnosticism, and Gnosticism is basically a school of Christian thought that really developed in the 1st century AD. Gnosticism took a more mystical approach to the teachings of Christ and actually put more emphasis on spiritual knowledge than on orthodoxy, on the dogma of what the church believed. There are so many Gnostic texts out there, and I highly, highly, highly recommend you read some of them. They're so fantastic. And they comprise what we call the Apocrypha, which is basically the book of texts that were rejected from the Bible. Because if you didn't know, the books of the Bible are not there because those are the only books of the Bible. They were picked. Why? So there are countless gospels that were actually rejected because they didn't go along with the story that the church had chosen. I cannot catch a break. And several of these Gnostic texts mention Sophia directly, and one of these is the Pistis Sophia. And this is just such a fascinating text, and one of the most interesting things that it describes, and some of the other texts do too, is the story of the fall of Sophia. How it was actually Sophia who fell from God's grace and caused the original sin of man, not Adam and Eve. But if you want more on that fascinating story, come to my seminar. Sophia's power is one of judgment and wisdom and knowledge and divine loving participation with the earth to bring it to its ultimate fulfillment. But as Christianity spread and the patriarchal leaders started to rewrite things to fit the narrative, Sophia was actually absorbed into another Greek concept that was really important at the time, which is logos, which means the word or divine reason. This title was also given to Christ. And so this is when we have this really fascinating merge of Sophia and Christ in what a lot of scholars call the Christ-Sophia syzygy. Word of the day, syzygy, look it up. And so for many centuries, the name of Sophia was forgotten. It was as if she never existed. She had just been sort of absorbed into the figure of Christ, and the divine wisdom of Sophia was now Christ's wisdom. Until the Middle Ages. My favorite. I like princesses and I will never stop. In the Middle Ages, there was sort of this renaissance of old mystical ideas, and there were a bunch of mystical thinkers who reached into the past and discovered Sophia. One of these mystics was Jacob Boehme, who actually wrote an entire mystical treatise on God and Sophia called Aurora. And he actually describes Sophia as being like the mirror of divine knowledge that makes it adaptable for humanity to access. So just as the moon captures the light of the sun that we can't look directly upon, Sophia captures the divine knowledge of God and reflects it back onto humanity. And I absolutely just think that is such a gorgeous image for what Sophia actually represented for the world. She was this divine mirror. She was this container of the great wisdom that we are always trying to access, but is always maybe a little bit too deep, too mysterious for us to really make part of our lives. But with this mystical renaissance of all of these ideas and of Sophia, it was, of course, the alchemists who decided to make her part of their tribe. Sophia in some ways actually became the alchemical goal. Now I know when we think of alchemy, we think of the Philosopher's Stone and alchemists trying to turn lead into gold, and all of that is true. They were trying to do that stuff. But when you really study alchemy, you start to realize that there was this spiritual undertone to everything, that there was a material path that they were following of trying to transform matter, but at the same time, it was a sacred path. They were trying to transform the soul within. And so Sophia became this divine feminine partner. She became the other half of the hieros, the sacred marriage, the chemical wedding, the mysterium conjunctionis. She was the feminine that the masculine within the alchemist was destined to meet and to merge with. And Sophia became an important figure for these mystical traditions that came out of the Middle Ages, that came out of the alchemical tradition and the Christian mysticism that was really popular at the time. For example, in Russian Orthodoxy, there is actually a field of study called Sophiology. And there is a sect of people who believe that Sophia is the Theotokos, the throne of God, which is a title that was once given to Isis and Mary as well, and stripped from Mary because
she cannot be divine.
But basically, it almost raises Sophia to the place of the fourth person of the Trinity. And we also see Sophia in this figure of the Black Madonna, who was this image of Mary that appeared all over Europe in the Middle Ages, in which Mary was depicted with black skin. And a lot of scientists have argued there was smoke in the churches and there was ash floating around and whatever. It wasn't intentional. But honestly, it doesn't even matter, because the amount of power that these figures seem to have was so much greater than any representation of Mary before. Millions and millions of people have made pilgrimages to these Black Madonnas and worshiped them to get their divine wisdom, to really connect with this deeper, more profound sense of divine femininity. And honestly, I could keep going for a while about the different places that we can locate Sophia. And really, what we have to know and understand about all these different ways that Sophia has come to us is that she has always been the bearer of wisdom. And she's really important for us to study, for those of us who are invested in the divine feminine, for really growing with the divine feminine and embracing it, and also for us witches out there who want to know about the goddesses that have shaped our world. So we want to understand Sophia as an archetype. We want to understand her as a core essence that has risen and manifested in countless different representations over the ages. This is why Sophia is kind of really hard to pin down because, like I said before, it's not just an Aphrodite who we can go to her temples and see where she was worshipped and how people depicted her. We kind of have to find Sophia in time. We have to find her in the Black Madonna and in the Gnostic Gospels and in the alchemical drawings. And what's really, really important about Sophia is that she is divine wisdom and also that she is the great virgin. And before you get all worked up about that word, we have to understand that there is a big difference between the virgin of the past and the virgin of our puritanical patriarchal brains. Today we know virginity as chastity, as sexlessness, but we want to think of virginity actually as self-agency. To the older, more ancient mindset, virginity meant somebody who did not need to unite with a partner to have any kind of sense of self. She was not defined by being mother or wife. She was totally her own being, and that was what the virgin was. Sophia, as an archetype, is entirely self-contained, and so she is the keeper of the wisdoms. She does not need to relate to a partner, to a husband, or even to a child to be a goddess of real authority. At her core, Sophia is the keeper of the mysteries. She is divine wisdom. She is the way to the truth. And most importantly, she is the world soul. And this is probably Sophia's most important role, and one that kind of brings us into the modern day, into the world of depth psychology. Did you really think we're going to get through video without talking about Jung? Carl Jung was a psychologist who believed that there was this psychic force called the anima, basically the internalized feminine, this archetype of divine femininity that at its highest stage was Sophia. Which means in our full embrace of the divine feminine, it is Sophia that we meet, who is the container of our souls and the souls of all the world. And that is just such a beautiful image to me. Sophia as the anima mundi is this thing I carry with me all the time that connects me to the divine feminine and reminds me of my purpose of being on this journey into the feminine itself. I want to know the depth of my own soul, and I know that Sophia in some ways carries that for me. And this is why so many tarotists connect with the High Priestess, because the High Priestess is Sophia. Arthur Waite, who is the intellectual creator of the Rider-Waite deck, came from this mystical tradition that was born in the Middle Ages. He was a member of the Order of the Golden Dawn, and he absolutely had met and knew Sophia in some way. And it is clear in her representation in the blue robes that she wears that he knew that Sophia was the keeper of wisdom, and that is exactly who the High Priestess is too. When we think of the High Priestess, we think of intuition and we think of connecting, with our psychicness and really knowing what path we're on. But when we expand that and we look at Sophia as this beautiful emanation of wisdom throughout time, it becomes so much deeper. We can look at the High Priestess as being the guide to the inner soul, not only trusting our intuition, but taking us into the depths of ourselves where that intuition comes from. She is the keeper of the mysteries of life that we are always called to approach, that we are circling around for all our lives. And so if all of this is interesting to you, if you are tingling a little bit like I am even talking about it, I really, really recommend that you come to my seminar on Sophia. She is somebody we really don't talk about enough. We talk about the dark goddess and we talk about sex magic, and we don't talk about Sophia. And to me, she is probably one of the most important sides of the divine feminine for us to continue the journey. So I highly recommend you come. We're going to be talking about so many different exciting things, and this is just a taste of what we're going to get into. So I really hope I see you there, and thanks for joining me and indulging me a little bit and just kind of fangirling about my favorite goddess. I'm just so grateful that you are here. Don't forget to subscribe Don't forget to follow me on Instagram, and I hope you just have a beautiful, meaningful day. Well, that took 50 minutes to record like a 15-minute video. You know what? If you ever thought about moving to New York because it's like cool and it's like got like main character energy and whatever, don't do it. It will never be quiet again.